Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Keynote panel. My name is Cyril Phillip. I'll be the moderator here. And so this is a panel on current or on investing from an AI from an investment perspective. We've gathered a great group of panelists here to provide a variety of different perspectives around investing in the AI space across different industries, across different strategies. I think we're going to try to get through a couple of key areas through this panel, kind of starting out with just current investment areas that we're looking at amongst us, gaps in AI that we see where there could be more investment, and then kind of closing out the session with just predictions around the future of AI. And so before diving into topics, we're just going to go do introductions, and I'll kick it off on my side and then pass it along to our fellow panelists or my fellow panelists here. So again, my name is Cyril Phillip. I'm currently a principal at Providence Ventures, which is the venture fund for Providence St. Joseph Health. It's a large West Coast health system. Our fund is a corporate strategic venture fund, so we invest both with returns in mind as well as from a strategic perspective. And so every company we look at investing has both a value out to Providence, our LP, as well as a potential for returns. I was one of the first hires on the team, so I joined back in 2015 when we launched our first fund and stayed on as we launched our second fund in 2019. Had a chance to work on probably 16 or so out of our total 19 investments in some capacity over the last 6 years. In terms of just the AI world in general, our fund has invested in several companies which have an AI bend, and I'll mention 2 of them before passing it along for other introductions. And so one of them is Gao Surgical, which is a medical device company that's focused on computer vision and enabling that within the operating room theater. And then the other one I'd mention is Protennis, which essentially helps monitor misuse of patient data through monitoring activity utilizing AI to identify bad actors. And both of these companies have had some significant success out in the market utilizing AI and building an ROI value for health system clients. So with that, I'll pass it over to Sudeep to kind of continue on with introduction on himself.
Hey, thanks, Cyril. Hey, everyone, this is Sudeep Chakravarti. I'm a partner here at Madrona Venture Group. So very quickly on Madrona, we're an early-stage venture fund based in Seattle. We invest primarily on the West Coast. We have 2 investment strategies today. One is seed and Series A focused, and then the other one is more Series B and C focused. We have been around 20 plus years. We are investing out of our Fund 7, $300 million fund. Each time we have raised about $300 million. And then we've kind of focused 70% of our dollars on enterprise, 30% on consumer. Very quickly on myself, so I've been an entrepreneur a couple of times. First time was a spectacular failure. Second time worked out much better. And then I've taken some of these lessons and moved over to the dark side in about 6-7 years ago. And then I invest in enterprise B2B, all the way from application layer down to infrastructure stack. In the past, I have invested in companies like serverless.com, Heptio, Streamlio, Exabeam, and then I was involved in companies like Databricks and Mesosphere, but those were not in my investments. At the moment here at Madrona, I work with about 7 companies. And then we have a very heavy focus on artificial intelligence, but what we call more specifically as intelligent applications. So AI-driven business applications. So I'm sure we'll get into that in more details, but happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks,
Sudeep. I'll pass it over to Ian.
Hi, everyone. So my background as an entrepreneur, I was fortunate to be involved in either founder or head of sales for 4 startups, of which 3 we end up being acquired and 1 we took public. My last company, which was acquired by a PE firm, I ended up after that deciding let's go and build out a venture fund with a slightly different focus. So rather than focus on early stage companies, we focus on emerging managers. So we help emerging managers basically raise funds for their own venture funds. So we've done a lot of work in the AI space. But so prior to that, part of this current work I'm doing, I have a deep experience in the AI space. Two of the companies I founded were in AI and fintech. As examples of what Level Ventures does, so we identify emerging managers who have performed really well and work with our pool of 50 family offices to go and actually invest in their funds and help them create the next generation of venture. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ian. Dennis, I'll pass it over to you for a quick intro.
Yeah, hey guys, I'm Dennis. I work for Ford Motor Company, so we make Mustangs and pickup trucks, but in the future, we're now a mobility company, and part of that future means a lot of these emerging technologies, in particular AI, and sort of the impact of software on our business. So in my role, I look after the venture asset class. I have a focus of driving strategic innovation. So again, full disclosure, I am a strategic investor, so balance sheet dollars matter, and also the strategic piece of it. So excited and kind of leveraging that corporate venture mindset to kind of bridge traditional industrial business with the opportunities that startups and the venture community brings to us.
Thanks, Dennis. Anupam?
Thanks. Hey, everyone. This is Anupam. I'm a general partner at a firm called Emergent Ventures. We are a seed stage venture firm, and we focus on entirely on enterprise software. And within that, we have a lens on what we call intelligent software, which is how we define it as software that gets smarter with use, often using AI, machine learning, data in a smarter manner. And going across, it could be either specific to a business function, sales, marketing, HR, customer service, finance, operations, what have you, or it could be IT infrastructure, or it could be vertical specific. And we tend to invest pretty early, pre-seed and early seed rounds. We are often the first institutional investor. We lead rounds, and we love to work closely with companies in the early days on helping them, find product market fit, building out early go-to-market, and then connecting with downstream sources of capital. In terms of my personal background, have been in the venture space for over a decade at this point, and held operating roles in enterprise software companies before that, building out different pieces of software. And yeah, I think I've watched the AI space very closely for the last 20 plus years, and looks like finally the rubber is really hitting the road. So look forward to discussing more on that.
Thanks. And Vic, we'll do the last intro.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. So my name's Vic Sassi. I'm a partner at Dreamers. It's an early stage venture fund co-founded by Will Smith and backed by the largest Japanese corporates, which make up our LP base. So Nomura, the big investment bank, Mitsubishi, ASICS, Shiseido, Dentsu, some of the more household conglomerates domiciled in Japan make up our capital base. So yes, we're based in LA. We launched Fund 1 2 years ago. We've been incredibly active. We're a generalist fund. We did 57 deals in that time period, so investing at a breakneck pace. As a pure play co-investor, our portfolio breakdown by sector is about 25% consumer, 25% healthcare, and the other 50 is kind of a random smattering of gaming, fintech, esports, edtech, mobility, et cetera. And then prior to Dreamers, I was at an insurtech, fintech focused fund backed by a Fortune 300 insurance carrier that whose asset management side was actually an LP in Madrona. So can certainly speak to Sudeep's and his colleagues' investing prowess, because it's American Family Insurance. They've been there for I think probably since the beginning, maybe even Fund 1, yeah, Fund 2.
Long time LP, yes.
Yeah, and we co-invested with Lattice, which was one of our another sort of AI company, which exited in 2017 to Apple. Anyway, while I was at AmFam, I did a lot of work in mobility, autonomous vehicles. Everyone thought that that would sort of sound the death knell for auto insurance, and then just general AI-enabled technologies, which, because of insurance, just reams of longitudinal data and claims history for loss prevention and all of the PI and underwriting, there were a number of different technologies. So that was sort of my how I cut my teeth.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for the intros. I think just from an audience perspective, I think this panel is really valuable in the sense that we have a bunch of folks who are kind of more generalist focused like Sudeep and Vic, and then you have myself, Anupam and Dennis, who have specific industry type focuses. and then Ian, who kind of looks at things from a much broader perspective, from a fund manager side. And so, as we dive into questions, we're going to try to kind of hit on everyone's areas of expertise and kind of get all those perspectives mixed in. And so the first area that I want to dig into is just, like when I'm looking at different, like one of the key challenges around AI is just identifying like what the areas that we want to invest in today. What are the current areas that interest us and have high potential in the market? And so the first question I'll direct towards Sudeep and to Vic, which is, both of you work for funds which have a much more broad industries focus. So you're looking at consumer, you're looking at industrial, you're looking at pretty much everything in between. When you see companies in the startup or in the AI space, how do you tell which ones have the most potential today? Meaning, like, what companies excite you, or areas in AI excite you today, and kind of what gets you excited about a company? And so I'll start with you, Sudeep, and then pass it over to Vic.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question. I'll share one thing that we actually have a common saying inside Madrona, that we do not invest in AI companies. What we do invest is AI-driven companies. So very rarely we would invest in a company that is, coming in and talking about, kind of the next best algorithm in X, because we strongly believe that, with open source and university research and everything, you are going to be leapfrogged if algorithm is the only thing you have. So our focus has been pretty much entirely on what we call intelligent applications. Again, we are not very good with marketing terminology, but think of them as applications that are driven by ML AI. Now, to answer your question more specifically, Cyril, like what makes it interesting, right? I'd say in a couple of things. So look, this will sound like a cliche, but it starts with the team, right? So I think when we look at a company that is touting AI ML as a key part of its value prop, we definitely want to see one or more co-founders having a strong underpinning from a technology standpoint in AI ML. But that is usually not sufficient for us to kind of get over the hurdle. What we like, an ideal founding team for us would be a great AI ML practitioner partnering with domain expertise. So for example, if you're going after, I don't know, expense management, right? If you just come in and say, oh, I have a great AI ML background, that is usually not sufficient. You need someone who has lived and breathed that problem in his or her prior life. So that's kind of one big thing. The other thing that I think we spend a lot of time on, and I'm sure everyone who does investments do it too, I would say a lot of these companies, we kind of really try to think, what is the moat they will have, and how can they really grow the moat? Like, if you think about it, in the early days, there was like technology moats like Intel's and AMD's. Then came the distribution mode like Salesforce and Workday and so on through SaaS. Then came the network effect mode like Slack and Facebook, LinkedIn. So I think in our mind today, it's like it has to be some kind of data moat, right? So you kind of through your product, you are collecting proprietary data, learning unique insights out of the data, which is making the product better. So can we really see that feedback loop that makes the product better through machine learning and data? So we spend a lot of time thinking about moats in our investments. So those are the two things that really come to my mind in terms of how we look at things.
Great.
Yeah, and as for my perspective, so we're kind of we run a very different or more of a non-traditional venture model, which is, we're pure play co-investors. We're not leading, we're not issuing term sheets. And so honestly, the crux of our, sort of fund model is co-investing with the best and basically top tier funds. I mean, it's no secret that, and Ian can probably shed a lot more light than I can on this, that, maybe 90% of the returns come from only 10% the top decile of funds. And so, our model almost rivals kind of like a fund of funds, so that if we can co-invest alongside the Madronas, we're LPs in one of Andreessen's funds, then hopefully we can get access to those same sort of returns. So yeah, so we're not technical. That said, I mean, obviously I'm piggybacking off a lot of what Sudeep said, but yeah, we very much try and leverage a lot of the diligence that's been done by some of the partners. They have excellent track records, and that's really what we're looking for.
Great. So before delving in from like a specific industry perspective on like areas of interest for both Anupam and Dennis in their areas, Ian, I just wanted to kind of pass it over to you in terms of, when you're looking at the world from a fund perspective, like what are the funds that you're seeing being successful who are focusing on AI, focusing on in particular, or kind of any thoughts you have around that?
Yeah, and there's two types that I'm particularly interested in right now. One of those who are creating AI focused efforts, and both goes on is the AI fund that Andrew Ng created. He did a very good job in, and those who know Andrew, he's one of the founders of Coursera, so he's deeply understands the space. So what he's focused on is building up a stable of companies that are all focused on AI and done a really good job. He has backing from the likes of Greylock and NEA, etc. He raised like 170 or so million. And that's a good approach. It's kind of like own a company very early on, build a sort of cohort of impressive companies in a space that you deeply know. And then there's more, I'd say, the other types of funds looking for those are who don't necessarily focus on AI exact. Not AI is not what I really care about. I mean, ideally, people don't talk about AI. They talk about customer needs. And so where areas that we see opportunity is going into verticals. So there's some interesting verticals that we think where AI, and also it's not just AI and the cross section and other technologies. There's AI and IoT, AI and blockchain, those kind of cross section areas where you've got a vertical based fund going after those particular areas, like in the bio space. There's a lot of opportunity to bring AI to healthcare, opportunity in research. So those are sort of areas that we've been interested in.
Great. That's helpful. So I'll just pass kind of the same question I asked towards Sudeep and Vic around like, what are you looking for when you find companies in the AI space over to Anupam first, in terms of, your fund focuses primarily on software type solutions, and at least in my view, it's software type solutions seem to always say that they have some sort of AI built into it. What kind of excites you today in terms of, when you talk to a company in the realm, how do you tell which one of the AI enterprise software type companies are ones you want to invest in when everyone's saying that they do AI?
Yeah, so I wish I had a crystal ball or a meter where I could just measure the AI efficacy of a investment, but it's a lot of the nuts and bolts of venture investing that apply to pretty much any investment. And I think and it's really about team and market for us, as for I think a lot of investors at the early stages. And our lenses on it specifically, if I were to start with market, we take a very customer focused approach to our evaluation. So we take a lot of time really talking to a lot of prospective customers. So at the stage we invest in, there's often not existing customers, because some of these may be pre-product, some are idea stage, some may have one or two early customers. But we have a strong network of folks in the enterprise software space that are close to the firm and across in Fortune 500 companies, where we often have these companies pitch to the customer. And what we're looking for is not someone that buys the product on the spot. Of course, that very rarely happens. But what we're looking for is we are looking to really understand the specific pain point. And is the pain point strong enough? Is there potential for AI or whatever the technology the company has to really change the game meaningfully beyond what's available in the market today? So a lot of the enterprise software subsegments have big entrenched players today. So we're really looking to see what is that significant delta that your product has or the approach has, which can really give you this foothold versus, let's say, a Salesforce or a Workday or what have you in whatever segment you are in. So we spend a lot of time on that front, really talking to prospective customers, industry advisors, just trying to see the nature of the pain point, existing processes. And often, one signal we pick up is often we'll find that there's a lot of work getting done manually, which people hate to do manually, when they're having to either pay someone to do it or they have people on their staff that are just spending time on activities with, they don't want to be spending time. And that's often a good signal that if AI can come and automate some part of that, then that's something that people would often be willing to pay for and adopt and go through that adoption cycle and activation energy to do that. So that's on the market. And then on the team, again, in addition to, of course, really, trying to bet on people that we think are super high caliber and have the right DNA and background and domain expertise, we're also looking for, the slope of the trajectory. So we spend some time getting to know the entrepreneurs we are partnering with. It's a long journey. Of course, you have to get along and respect them, and they have to respect us. But in addition, we try and measure the slope of the trajectory over the maybe 3 to 5 to 8 weeks that we are in touch with them. In many cases, we follow them for 6 months or 12 months, and we're trying to see how fast they're learning and iterating and taking feedback from customers and weaving that into their product and their pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very similar approach to what we take when we look at specifically your point around, like if they're solving something that nobody wants to do, in healthcare, at least in the industry, there's just so many things that are being done that nobody ever wants to do. And so we look a lot at, RPA type companies, so robotic process automation solutions that could kind of fit in and plug those type of problems that no one else wants to spend time working on. And so that's interesting. So Dennis, I guess the question for you is, when I think about like Ford and like the industrial space, like, and AI, the first thought that comes to my mind is like, self-driving cars or something along those lines. But it would be great to kind of get your view around like, what are the technologies that interest you today and that you're seeing out in a space that I frankly don't have that much visibility into? It'd be great to get your perspective.
Yeah, so I think to your point, the knee-jerk reaction of whenever you think of Ford is, hey, if I'm doing a autonomous driving vehicle, the stack there, cybersecurity, these types of things. But I think a lot of that, to be frank, the capital requirements are much higher. You'd see people moving away from full stack. Most of the action there really is going one layer underneath. And I would say, as you think about capabilities that matter and startups that are interesting to invest in for us, if you come with the next electric car or the next AV company, sure, you and everybody else are knocking on our doors. And from a strategic perspective, if you think of, to Anupam's point, there are actually a lot of pressing needs, things that are manual, things that aren't necessarily digitally enabled, and the software impact on those capabilities has materially changed our business, right? Think of Ford, the pride and joy is every 9 seconds, you're pushing an F-150 off the line. But to enable that and to compete with the future, what's the biggest criticism? Oh, so-and-so is building a new gigafactory. So-and-so is using these technologies in the cars. What are you guys doing? And so I think for us, especially on the industrial side, and I have the benefit of sitting with our research advanced engineering folks, is taking those external capabilities, particularly with the AI stuff, that you can kind of tag along our scars and bruises and sort of mistakes, if you will, and collected years of learning with really making things and buildings and pushing them off the line. And so key areas for me are digital twinning, things that enable sort of visual inspection, things that you traditionally would just go through a long process. For example, the logistics and fleet organization of shipping a random part seems pretty nuts and bolts and pretty easy, but there are certainly areas that can be further enabled capabilities-wise within our own network just by having some folks coming in. So I'm sort of lucky. I have technical folks that can pilot and try and test things. But I think as a co-investor, what I bring to the table is, if I love it, I'm going to be a customer. If I really love it, I'll buy it. And the valuation, even though this is recorded and you probably shouldn't be telling my CFO, you think about it, if I'm right at a $50 million valuation, I'm probably still right at 100. And if it's so meaningful to my business and the right business unit say, hey, I must have that, you can imagine as a corporate, those dollars don't matter. If you think about where our business is going and if we are to compete with the folks coming out there and the startups that have aligned ways in how we want to do things, I think it's a really interesting proposition, not just as a co-investor, but as a customer and acquirer down the road.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective. And I guess that kind of leads to the next area. And I guess this question for you, Vic, in terms of, as a co-investor focused fund, valuations in the AI realm are relatively high. I mean, I know that I think all the venture investors here could know that, but when you see kind of the areas that are out there in AI and you get some of your co-investors coming in, talking with you, like what kind of excites you the most? Like, what are those areas that are growing right now? And did you see a lot of need for in terms of, you know, the funds that are coming to you, you know, presenting to your fund around opportunities to invest in, particularly in AI? Like, what are the like key areas that, you know, they see the highest growth potential for? If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess, you know, it kind of depends on, because we're doing this kind of interesting co-investor model. A lot of it comes down to, you know, the diligence that we do in conjunction with the lead partners. And a lot of it comes down to how are they looking at the return profile of these deals? I mean, I think everyone on this panel, you know, has probably been complaining about high valuations in the Valley for years now, and certainly not just relegated to AI, but all sorts of different industries and sectors. And, you know, we probably thought COVID was, you know, the biggest secret in the Valley, I feel like, was that it was going to be the silver lining, was that valuations, you know, dropped maybe in April and May. And then it was like, boom, 8 weeks later, and we're right back to where we were, operating all cylinders. So just for, you know, but to answer your question specifically, yeah, we really care about, you know, that return profile. We'll run our own sort of sensitivity tables as to where we think this is going to exit. And especially because we're a co-investor, and as you get into these later rounds, obviously our liquidation, you know, we're not able to maintain our pro rata liquidation preferences, especially at the later stage, kick in and can really stack and be, you know, far more dilutive than one would sort of assume. And so we sort of just model that in, and, you know, we try and be as conservative as we can be, you know, giving haircuts at each sort of successive round. But yeah, but it really comes down to, you know, I guess Sudeep was just saying there were, you know, $300 million funds, but some of the other funds we co-invest with are $1 billion plus. And so we also wonder, you know, how are you going to 3x that to your LPs in 10 years? And so that's a question that we're all, honestly, I mean, I think kind of wondering. You know, we've seen the mega funds continue to fill their coffers, especially during COVID, having been able to raise, you know, these massive funds, massive opportunity sidecar funds, et cetera. So the jury is very much still out, I would say. And Ian, again, can probably, you know, has more visibility on all of the sort of emerging managers that have probably graduated into more established funds. But yeah, to us, it's still very much an open question, but return profile sensitivity analysis is, you know, part and parcel of every investment we make.
Yeah. So I guess going to you, Ian, then, I mean, and going along Vic's point around, like, you know, you have all these funds that are trying to, you know, generate pretty significant returns off large capital bases. Like, when you talk to emerging managers out in the market, like, and they're looking to build a new fund based on an AI relative thesis, like, what's most compelling to you, or what have you seen been most compelling to the overall market for these managers? Is that something you could give us some insight on too?
Sure, it's all really about track record, it's performance. Although that has to be tempered by the fact that just because you have performance in a fund doesn't mean you have performance in starting your own fund. There's a very different skill set to actually running a fund than being an investment manager one. So I would say that it's having a track record of performance, and our model is fairly unique. What we do is we work with those fund managers throughout their career. And when they see opportunities that we think they think are a good fit for us, they bring them to us and we invest in them. So by the time we've worked with them on a couple of deals, by the time they want to raise their own fund, they're well and truly understood by us. And therefore it's a much easier, it's not like a fresh relationship, it's been nurtured over time. And so to the extent where the AI piece fits in, I wouldn't say we have a thesis around AI. AI just happens to be a very relevant topic showing what we believe is long-term returns in the space. So it's not the sole driver. In fact, just one more bit of insight that'll help you a bit as well in terms of our fund is that most of our family office we work with, the folks that are LPs, are based in Europe. And many of them are looking for access to great deal flow opportunities that aren't here. So I don't know, we're all based here I think all on West Coast, it sounds like. But that's a great place where there's a lot of values being created. And so for our LPs, getting access to innovative fund managers coming up with new models is particularly attractive. So it kind of depends where you begin, where you start from, is to help understand the context.
Yeah, no, that's a interesting way to think about it in terms of like, that that first, it's like if you have a team and you're looking to raise a fund, that doesn't necessarily, like, it's good to have that track record, but like it's sometimes like misleading to some degree. So that's an interesting way to look at things. So I guess just kind of going back more towards kind of the AI side. So Anupam, this is a question for you in particular. Since you focus a lot more on kind of earlier stage type companies out there, when you're out in the market and you're talking with earlier stage startups, and they're coming to you with like these really big vision ideas around AI technology, like what are those visions, like what visions have you seen that actually resonate a lot with you? Because I mean, I think, like, and again, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're working with earlier stage companies, it's a lot of it's just kind of about like that vision type that they have for their company, similar to what Ian was talking about with the fund managers. And so like, how do you parse through those like broad visions around like future AI potential type solutions, and find which ones you'll actually back as a fund?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think it's always a balance between looking for really big vision, and at the same time we're looking for someone that can marry this with something that's here and now, and what can you deliver in the next 6 months, next 12 months, next 18 months to a customer that would be of value to them. Whether it's an MVP or something more than that, and that's what we spend a lot of time really thinking about, is what are those stepping stones, right? What is the MVP? Can it deliver sufficient value for it to be interesting to someone? And then you build from there. And is there a way to layer those steps? And that's both at the evaluation stage, but a lot of this also happens, after we invest. We work pretty closely with the companies we invest in on this particular topic, because this is a constant battle that you have with the first, let's say, $1 or $2 or $3 million that you've raised at the seed stage. You cannot get to anywhere near even a fraction of your big picture vision, but you have to lay the stepping stones in a manner where the direction is still leading to that big picture vision. So let's say it's a lot more art than science, and we've been fortunate to partner with quite a few companies which have laid those stepping stones. Maybe I'll take a couple of quick examples. One is a company called Observe.ai, which applies AI to the call center space. And they were, of course, there's a lot of money, over $300 billion spent globally on call centers, and virtually no one is happy with that. In many cases, customers are not happy. In most cases, the people that have the call centers then unhappy with the costs and the low NPS for those call centers. So this company started with, focusing on the quality assurance side of call centers, which is a subsegment of that $300 billion market. It's still a $10 billion market today, where there are people actually listening into calls, recording the calls, but they only do that for 1% of the calls. And they don't do a great job because it's a boring job. Who wants to sit and listen to calls and make notes with paper and pen, right? So this company started with just taking that and using some cutting edge voice AI technology, a lot of it off the shelf, and then fine tuning those models for these call center use cases. And then now they've sort of layered those stones into the big picture long-term vision, being that, hey, you can actually intelligently automate some of the low-hanging fruit. And on the way, you can augment the agents, where you can be showing the agents actually much better relevant info while the call is going on, using the data that you've built, using the quality assurance data. So a little bit like crawl, walk, run strategy. So you're looking for that crawl, walk, run type approach, where you have this approach to collecting data. Initially, you use that data to build a better solution, and then eventually you do more automation with that. But let me pause there. I mean, that's one example of a company, but we see that across a lot of our, we're looking for that sort of general pattern generally.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You mentioned kind of call centers, because that's obviously an area for health systems in particular, where we're always looking for kind of ways to automate it and ways to process out, given the significant volume of calls to healthcare providers. It's kind of the way of the way of doing business. And so, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I think, though, from an investment standpoint, what interests me is I want to see companies that have a significant amount of traction out in the market, because we as a large health system, when we make an investment, we want to make sure it's in a company that can service us, like from a broad perspective. And so even if we find really innovative companies at an early stage, sometimes it just won't work because we're kind of restricted somewhat with respect to it needs to be some type of company that has the capability to work with a Providence-sized organization. And so I guess I'll pose the next question to you, Dennis, around when you're seeing AI companies come to you and they have kind of forward-thinking visions, like kind of the companies that Anupam described, like, do you also have that similar type of restriction when you look at investing in companies, in terms of it needs to be something that that the Ford mothership in some way can work with, or are you a little bit more? Are you able to be a little bit more, and not speculative, but like a little bit more forward-leaning around that? It'd be great to get your perspective.
Yeah, so I think so the three buckets I'm told by the mothership I need to look at is mobility, which is anything from point A to point B; core, which is things that include things that you typically think of for factory of the future, logistics, supply chain. I did desktop metal underneath that. The last one they call EV, AV connectivity, which internally we joke is everything up until a flying car, but I'm looking at drones, not necessarily for operating a taxi fleet, but for battery technologies, fleet management capabilities, the array of sensors and things like that, and optimizing a lot of the software stack that could be utilized for whether it's data transfer, prioritizing on the edge devices and chipsets and stuff like that. And so under those three, I can literally pick any startup and put them under two, if not three buckets, as you think about the future. And a lot of the things that, to your point, as you look at and you try to say, does this match my sort of strategic need, and what are the areas that it helps enable? One of the ways that helps me really fine tune, does this even matter, is oftentimes a lot of these are so early. And if they come in the door and they say, hey, I'm an AI company targeting automotive, and they don't have an automotive background or industrial or defense or oil and gas, one of these old industries, I immediately have concerns like, do you guys know how hard it is to break into the supply chain? And as you think about a founding team and the capabilities, part of it is, yes, they have to be kind of crazy and want to tackle this for us. But a lot of it is kind of getting to know them and understanding, kind of like what Ian said, like, can you block and tackle and kind of take on these things and kind of go through the journey as you mature through the process. For us, it's easy to chat with almost any of us. Any number of the OEMs, tier ones, traditional manufacturers all have innovation shops out here. Talking to the technical people, you have to kind of understand, are you meeting those needs? And the, I guess, secret people don't know as much as most of us talk to each other. If you're a voice company, you come in, most likely you'll get one or two emails or texts saying, hey, I talked to these guys over at your tier one job or competitor shop. What do you guys think? And so if you're really buttoned up and you do well, that traction almost happens without you knowing. And to understand that if you can progress with one, sometimes we'll sign like a two-way, three-way JV to kind of get something going. And so teams that understand how to get that first customer, really deliver that need, that's sort of where I gravitate to, because ultimately, if it's good for us and good for some of our frenemies, it helps me get that deal across the line. Because to your point, I don't want to invest in a company and have to turn around and say, hey, Mr. CFO, we lost that deal, right? Like it went nowhere. Like you just can't really do that and do this for a long time.
Yeah, no, that's similar to our approach. And Sudeep, I'd appreciate your kind of insights here, given you also invest on kind of the earlier side, but to Dennis and my kind of experience, like we both can lean on Providence and Ford to provide a lot of guidance. I mean, for your team, like who do you lean on from a diligence perspective when you look at AI technologies out there, and like how do you separate kind of the chaff?
Yeah, I'm smiling a little bit to myself because I have none of your constraints. Meaning, like I think we are investing at a stage when it's really two person and a dog, and an idea on a napkin. So it's like and I probably shouldn't say this to a former LP. I'm looking at you, Vic, but it's like 40% of our deals go nowhere, right? That's kind of the reality. But in a couple of like 10-20% work out, hopefully they work out big. So we live in a very different world from theirs. I think from particularly from you guys. But I think for us, what we really like, what it really comes down to when it comes to AI companies is, like, when I'm hearing a founder talk about the vision, am I hearing technology or am I hearing a customer problem? And a lot of and it's particularly true for AI companies, where founding team comes in and they talk about this fantastic technology they have built. And don't get me wrong, like, I have a PhD in computer engineering, so I'm a geek, okay? But it just, it's like, all I'm saying is, if technology is your end all, company starts and ends with technology, you are going to go nowhere. So I think we focus really heavily on what is the customer pain point you're going to solve. And AI just happens to be a means to it, right? So that's where we really try to double down. Like, I just wrote a note to a founding team I really liked, fantastic technical guys. And the reason we are kind of regretfully passing is we don't believe they really understand the market, that they are going after. And it's just a, kind of a showstopper for us, as much as we like the founding team. I would say one other thing, like, the stage at which we invest in, obviously there's no traction, or mostly there's no traction, right? We do look at some proxies though, like, open source is a big part of it. So there have been a number of companies we have invested in that have, open source traction for the underlying project. I mean, the business might be something very different, but you can see that some of the underlying, just momentum around the core technology. So we look at those signals pretty heavily, pretty closely. The last thing I would say is, you asked me, like, where do we lean in for due diligence, right? So it's mostly inside the firm. And what we do is, and it's not unique to us, I'm sure Anupam and others do the same. We literally, like, we literally spend a lot of time kind of thinking about themes, kind of doing homework on themes. So we are not like, we don't go after every deal. I mean, that's not our MO. We try to be more thematic in our approach to investing. So, like, we actually, again, it's not earth-shattering to any domain expert, but we routinely publish stuff on our website, like themes that we are interested in. If it is future of work, or no code, low code, or whatnot. So we keep kind of really going deep into those themes, and that have helped us the most, frankly, because by the time we meet a founding team, we already have prepared minds, right? So it's like, due diligence goes faster, conviction comes faster, and very importantly, like, convincing the founding team to work with us, is a lot, it happens a lot more organically. We are not trying to really, like, getting to know the space for the first time. So we spend a lot of time kind of in that thematic understanding. But yeah, we live in a very different world, Cyril.
Yeah, sometimes I may wish to be in your world sometimes, in Anupam's world, in terms of, like, having a little bit more leeway in the earlier stage. But again, it's like, to your point, like, it's such a hard, nut to crack in terms of, like, the 40% number. I mean, like, that's true for a lot of earlier stage type funds. And so it's hard to get that to work. I guess kind of leaning back towards kind of AI type technology.
So before you hop off that topic, one of the things I might want to point out is, while Sudeep can play earlier, I think for entrepreneurs, and I think also for other investors on this call, a lot of us on the corporate side, we have different buckets of money we can pull. So for example, if you do research type pilot work, I'm not saying we want anybody to do work for free, but generally you're not going to get rich from doing that. But those engagements is like a really great dating and get to know each other process. And when we know the team better and we know what you can do, and we also realize, can you be coached? Is there a path for you to move somewhere else? Then it makes it easier for me from a pure inorganic capital deployment perspective to try to make an investment. But I think using some of those to help fund you early on, establishing those relationships, and not being frustrated that you can't ask for an investment up front, use those in your traction conversation, because I'm more than happy to provide references for folks as they go through those processes, maybe not comment specifically on the work, but I think tapping that, and I think a lot of the corporates and financials are starting to realize that there is a syndicate model where we can fund early stage R&D, ultimately be a potential acquirer, and in between deal with some of the headache of having our legal team joining on a round. But I think ultimately for the right deal, it is worth it and is a good path to kind of glide in, as opposed to knocking on the door sort of out in the cold. So sorry, I know it's a bit of a tangent. I think that's one of the things that people forget about us. We can have different buckets to kind of utilize.
That's interesting, because I think one of the challenges to that is just kind of burnout on the operational side. It's like if you keep asking kind of, your teams to take on kind of these earlier stage type ideas, do you ever get pushback from those folks about that or anything along those lines? Or have you found kind of the right partners within Ford to help you?
Yeah, so it depends on team. So, at the risk of oversharing, there are certain traditionally focused teams that we're maybe not our best fans. Think of traditionally manufactured, it's hard to crack that nut. But I think those folks are also the ones that once they embrace what you're selling, your loudest critic is now on your side. And I think for us, it's really as hard as the startup and other investors are pitching a company to us, we're doing the same internally from the strategic side, and navigating that and finding the right advocates is as important as finding the right investors. So in my mind, that's one of the functions that for the person to do this role properly, you kind of have to manage that. And I would admit different shops have various levels of sort of sophistication there. But if you make a few phone calls around, you'll realize pretty quickly who has the teams that can help you where and who has the teams that are just going to kind of waste your time. So, without kind of pointing at specific fingers to folks, it's like a pretty open secret.
Yeah, it's hard to navigate on the corporate side. I can attest. So I guess just kind of going back towards AI. So Ian, like you have a background in the kind of fintech, insurtech world. When you look at that world, like today, given your work today, like what's kind of your wish list of technology that you want to see there, and kind of see develop out of that market, given kind of your past experience?
Yeah, I'd say the most interesting thing I think is the whole automated sort of machine learning. So the idea being is if we can start to simplify machine learning, so it doesn't take someone with a deep, I know that Sudeep, your background in as a PhD guy was very valuable at the onset of AI, but how do we get this broad? How do we get it used by companies, let's say community banks? How does a community bank better service their customers and uses AI to do so, to better be more efficient and more effectively reach the right audience, the right product, at the right time? So that doesn't happen if you have to employ someone who's a data scientist. It is too expensive. So how do we make it more attainable? How do we make, and I think that's where automated machine learning comes along. And then you also have the other concept is A2 machine learning, which is other concept of automated machine learning. so where machine learning eats software, where there's a whole slew of opportunities there that I see around the development of AI, opening up other areas which were previously either the people couldn't afford it, didn't have the expertise, and whether it's banking or insurance or other industries, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, no, it's strange because like I look at my wish list for AI in kind of similar almost lens in terms of like, like it's a little bit different in that like I want technologies that's proven out already clear ROI value to other health systems. And frankly, it's kind of hard to find that for a lot of companies that are out there in the AI realm. I think a lot of it's kind of just like wishy-washy data to some degree, and trying to weed through that and find the companies that actually have like hard ROI, like return on investment metrics for health systems, is kind of the challenge that I see. And so like the wish list I want is actually not necessarily a wish list in that, if you're a company out in the marketplace who's focused on AI, I think the key way to kind of build rapport with your customers is really, having that type of like ROI data that you can show, hey, like this is something that actually works, and we want to kind of see deployed. And so Vic, I just wanted to ask you a question around kind of a similar type look at, when you're diligencing companies, with your co-investors, like is ROI important to you, like in terms of the customers of those companies, or are you looking at other metrics? It would be great to kind of get your perspective there.
Yeah, ROI is certainly plays. And sorry, do you mean ROI in the customer's perspective, or do you mean?
Yeah, like so. What I mean by that is like, so if Providence was to adopt the solution, like, and we're paying X dollars for it, are we actually going to get like that money back and generate cost savings or generate revenue as a result of that? Because that's kind of the critical question for any new solution that we adopt.
Sure.
Hopefully that makes it clear.
Yeah. No, that's certainly one of the key points we do as we look at sort of, and we'll do reference checks on their customers, and coming also from sort of the fintech and insurtech world. Actuaries are basically the OG data scientists. Or I guess now it's cool because they call themselves data scientists instead of actuaries, just using math and statistics to sort of predict the future for a lot of these risk tables. So yeah, and even just to speak to one example is, insurance I think was one of the first few industries with RPA, and specifically for UiPath, because I think AmFam was one of the sort of pilot. It was one of their first pilots in the industry, and I think UiPath, whenever they do indeed go public, will have a very similar sort of maybe very similar hype and hopefully returns as something like Snowflake, which was the belle of the ball a few weeks back when it went public. So yeah, it's certainly doing, as you were saying, ROI for customers is sort of a no-brainer, but obviously, when you have it on these sort of mega enterprise level, that just goes to show how impactful those companies can be.
Yeah. So we have about 6 or so minutes, or maybe 7 or so minutes left. And so the last area that I wanted to kind of probe the panel on is just, when you look at kind of the next 12 months, specifically around AI, like what are like some predictions you have in terms of technologies that'll come out strong? And it could be due to kind of the impact of COVID, it could be due to other factors. But like, what are the type of technologies that you see, jumping off the page? And then I'll hit with my example first, which is in the healthcare space. I see companies that are focused on utilizing like IoT data for wearables and other devices that are in the home setting, because I see there being a more significant push towards remote patient monitoring in the home. And so AI technologies that can utilize the variety of data streams that are going to be coming out of these new devices in the home are really intriguing to me, and I see them as kind of picking up steam over the next 12 months. And so Anupam, I'd be interested in your view around, like, more generally in an enterprise software world, like, given kind of impact of COVID, given kind of what's happened in the last 7 or so months, like, what are you thinking will occur in the AI realm over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think 12 months is a relatively short time, so I think we'll continue to see more of. I think there's a lot of just curves of adoption that are going up within the AI space and beyond. I think we'll just continue to see a lot of that applied to different business functions. And I'd say with the last 6 to 9 months, I think one change has been that companies are just trying to much more reopen to just reimagining every business function they have within their own corporations, whether it's sales, marketing, finance, HR, customer service. There's a lot of reinvention that's been historically going on in these fields the last 3 to 5 years with automation and AI. But I think it just takes another different level now. And a lot of that has been boardroom talks in the last 6 months, which will convert into budgets and action in the next 12 months. And we're seeing that already. Several of our companies are actually seeing acceleration right now, because companies are just much more open to adopting these things as long as they can see a path to better ROI, better resilience, increased productivity, increased ability to collaborate for remote workers, better security, some of those things. Yeah, so if I had to name one, I'd say that.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So Ian, I guess the question to you is kind of similar, but more from a fund perspective. Like, do you see like funds who focus on AI being more successful over the next 12 months, or less successful, or equally successful as other funds who are more generally focused? And kind of what are you hearing out in the market around that?
I'd say that from some of the funds we initially started working with, we helped launch about a year or so ago. It's still too early on for us to be able to give a read on that. But I'd say that the area of, to sort of continue the theme around AI in particular, I mean, the areas that I'm interested in particular, and doing a lot of research in trying to find approaches, which is this whole area of AI and IoT, and specifically areas like tiny ML, tiny machine learning, and then actually there's a shout out to my own, I previously was at Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, and we created a company there I saw spun out, which is called Latent AI, and they're doing something interesting where they're taking neural networks and then also files, compressing them so they can be available in a tiny ML environment. And so things like that I think are very fascinating. Is that kind of how do we with the crossover of AI and machine learning and IoT, those areas I'm most intrigued about. In terms of the funds, it's too early on to give a read on, on how they are. Normally have like a 8 to 10 year cycle. So
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So Dennis, I guess, and then for you, like in your realm or in your industry area, like what do you foresee kind of changes on the AI side over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think similar to a lot of other folks here, a lot of the companies I talk with and some within our portfolio, I think you saw the first 6 months starting in March, sort of the world's coming to an end, to kind of now with capital markets being on fire, everybody sort of saying, hey, stuff's coming back online. You sort of wonder, is that daylight or is that train coming down the tunnel? And so as you think about that, I think the companies you'll find most successful will be sort of what Steve talked about, the ones that can really identify this is still a business pain point for us, even in this constrained environment, where companies are really, meaning the corporate side is really thinking where the dollars are really need to kind of accelerate on. Companies that address that pain point, this is a great time. Teams are largely remote. People are understanding the software capability can really impact your business if you can't be next to each other every single day working on things. And from a manufacturer's perspective, that's a huge cultural change. So I think guys and girls that are thinking about companies and opportunities that can help us address that are in a great position, because our appetite to kind of engage there is pretty high right now.
Yeah, and so Sudeep, we have maybe a couple of minutes left, and so it would be great to get your view.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were asking originally, like, what is maybe a technology or two we are excited about. I'll answer that with a specific example. I think we all kind of saw the GPT-3 coming out of OpenAI, which kind of completely changes the game when it comes to natural language processing. And I think we are going to see in the next 12 months, if you ask me, we're going to see a slew of companies, coming out, around that particular thing. Like how can we, like it just, kind of human text generation at a human level is really interesting with the technology. I'll give you an example. One of our companies, like pretty much overnight built a great automated customer support, tool using GPT-3. And it was phenomenal. It's like, you interact with it, it feels like you're talking to a human being, but it's all in a kind of GPT-3 under the hood. So I think, it's a kind of a game changer. And just, we are backing a company that's sort of like built on top of that technology to go after, kind of more mundane work related stuff, but pretty interesting. So I think we'll see a bunch of things around that. I would say one other thing, what I'm seeing a lot of action right now is, I think, this whole world has, is like moving solidly towards like, okay, we have built models now, how can we actually put them in production? I mean, it's not new, but I think there's a whole momentum around that where, okay, going from, the models in a data scientist's hands to actual like running it in production. So you will see, like, we're already seeing a bunch of companies coming out in this space, who are kind of, quote unquote, helping people cross that last mile into production. So we're actually pretty excited about that. We have a company in that space called Algorithmia, but, continue to look at a bunch of other, I would say, related solutions. We don't invest in competing companies, but related, opportunities.
Well, I think we're at time, and so really appreciate all the panelists here for jumping on, and also for the conference for the opportunity to kind of discuss AI from an investment perspective. And so appreciate you and appreciate the audience taking the time to learn from us and learn from our experience.